Hi, I'm John Mark. Welcome to the Beaten Zone. This podcast is about war, not from the top down, but from the ground up. It's about unearthing personal truths of war, its costs, and how it shapes the lives of the people who experienced it firsthand. We're kicking off this project with a multi-part series on the experiences of Blackhawk Company 1st Battalion, 23rd Infantry's deployment to Iraq from late 2003 to late 2004. Today's guest will provide us with a commander's view of that experience. Rob Robinson, a 23-year Army veteran with tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, took command of Blackhawk Company in the days leading up to their deployment. Rob and his troops arrived in the city of Samarra and came to grips with an urban insurgency that controlled the city and surrounding countryside. After 2 difficult months of operations, Rob's company deployed to the ancient city of Mosul, Iraq's second largest city with a multi-ethnic population. What Blackhawk Company would encounter was escalating violence spurred by insurgents organized by the Ba'athist military officers removed from service after the United States disbanded the Iraqi army. What they would also encounter was the rising influence of foreign fighters and the rise of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's so-called AQI network. This was the environment in which Rob and his soldiers operated for the better part of 2004, a pivotal period in the early phase of the war in Iraq. Their actions and the actions of the insurgents would have long-term consequences for the people of that city. Rob has a reputation for being a straight-shooting, no-BS officer. That might have ruffled feathers among more senior officers and peers, but according to a few of his troops with whom I've spoken, there was no better man for the moment. In this conversation, we talk about Rob's personal journey that started as the son of a soldier and took him to West Point, multiple tours of combat as an infantry officer, and a new life as a husband, mentor, and tech leader. I can't think of a better guy to help us kick off this project. And now, here's my conversation with Rob Robinson. Thanks for being here, man. I'm really honored that you were kicking us off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what else am I going to do, man? It's Friday. No, but the other part of it is like you took the time out to be a guest on my show, and it's the least that I can do to return the favor. And, talking about our experiences are important because, there's a lot of people that will write their own history. And, sometimes they either omit details or they embellish details. And the truth we know is probably somewhere in the middle, to be completely honest.
That's right.
But, yeah. And the
Amen.
only other thing I got, and I'll lead with this so we can get it out of the way and, get into the heart of the conversation is like, we're recording this on 9/12, right, of 2025. What I would ask everybody to do, those of you that are old enough to remember, think about where you were on September 11th and think about how much love, patriotism, and heartfelt sentiment was for the United States on 9/12 of 2001, and try and bring some of that forward to today because we need it. Like there's too much divisiveness in the world. And, if you're old enough to remember, 9/12 of 2001, this country was a completely different place. But I think
Yeah.
that, it just has to be said. We got to honor, those that we lost and just think about everybody involved in that process. And like, are you a person that was worthy of their sacrifice? And if you are, continue to do what you're doing. If you're not, maybe you should have some introspection and think about, what you're actually doing. But I'll pause there.
No, that's great, Rob, and we'll touch more about that later in the conversation because I want to talk about some of the bigger topics. I really want to start off just by asking you just a straight on the nose question. What was the first memory that comes to mind when you think about Samara?
All right. So, like, we talked about this, and it's the chicken coop, man. Right. And I feel bad for this. And I'll tie this back. I'll tell a quick story and then tie it to the actual event. So, the first thing that I would say is like, Samara was the capstone of almost 2 years of training in the Stryker Brigade. So, I showed up. They still had LAV force from the Marines and Centauros from the Italians that they were training on, which are similar platforms. So we did all this training and, JRTC, NTC, crazy, all that stuff. And then we finally deployed. But one of the things that led us into Samarra that got us more prepared for the field was the month that we spent in Kuwait. And those of you that went later into deployments, you just went straight from home station into your respective part of the theater that you went into. Whereas we actually had a chance to gel as a company. And I think that benefited me. And I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later of how I came into command. But, that month in Doha allowed us to solidify ourselves as an organization because we trained the whole time for 30 days. Right. And some people did similar stuff to us, and some people did stuff that like made you go, okay, like that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And one of the things that I made my guys do every day when we were training was we drove to and from the range. And why we did that was because it allowed us to get the sets and reps in that we wouldn't get like if we would have bivouacked out at the range site. So we drove back every time. And that benefited us greatly when we got into places like Samarra and when we got into Mosul, particularly when we started doing operations at night a lot. But thinking about Samarra, a lot of people haven't had to do this or didn't do this in their military career. Imagine living out of a patrol base for 30 days. No showers, no water. The only water that you had was on your trucks and what they flew in, living inside of your vehicle for 30 days. Like we got Christmas packages in a patrol base, and it's one of those things where you're like, holy moly, man, like when did this happen? Like how did this happen? Right. Like, cause when you think about GWAT, especially the tail end of it, there's all kinds of cops and combat outposts and fobs here and there. Like we drove through Taji. So like, and that's the other part. Like when we drove up from Kuwait, Taji was a couple blown up hangars and an airstrip. It was nothing like it was at the end of the war. Mm-hmm. And so, the main memory that comes back from Samarra is just austerity. Like everything was just like, it's old school, very, very old school. Like you're living out of your rucksack. You're, day to day, it's like, hey, look, guys, I'm going to let you have a little bit of stubble on your face because we don't have water, right? I would rather you drink the water that you have than shave your face. That's dumb, And then as the logistics train kind of caught up with the operation, then, things got better. But one of the other pieces of it was like the communications aspect, because we were operating in another brigade's footprint and we were the new kids. And to be quite honest, I know that there's a large portion of the community, particularly the armor community, that wanted to see strikers fail. Right. And like the pattern of development in military history is simply this, like we had quarter ton Jeeps, which were cool, then we got Humvees and everybody's like, oh, Humvees are cool. Right. Then we had M1s and Bradleys. And then when the Bradley came out, the Bradley became the cheapest tank in the Army. And then over time, the cheapest tank in the Army became some other platform vehicle. In the early 2000s, it was Strykers. In the mid to late 2000s, it was MRAPs. By the time we got back to, towards the end of Afghanistan, it was MATVs, and now it's the ISV, right? So when you look at it, the cheapest tank in the Army is always some kind of vehicle that's new that everybody wants. And there are a lot of naysayers on the Stryker just because, like, oh, this is going to get rid of the armor community. Well, that wasn't the intent. It was to basically make everybody motorized and get to the objective fresher, right? And it would have been the same thing as a Bradley company or a Bradley platoon, but we just had more dismounts, right? When I dropped ramps as a company commander, I had twice as many people in my footprint as my counterparts in 4th ID. And so that was a huge difference. That was one of the big differences. And then the other big difference was just communication. Like, it's like we had people cross over into our battle space with no pre-coordination, and like, dude, like that's a recipe for disaster. Like, at least I know what a Bradley looks like, day and night. So I'm not going to shoot at it. But when you start talking about, when you look at the history lessons from that, I actually served with a guy who was in the unit that got shot by Apaches in Desert Storm. Mm-hmm. They were in LAVs. They were Marines. And so if you don't get proper target identification on a LAV, it does look like a Bertum at night. If you don't have proper night vision or proper target identification, they got shot and dudes got hurt. Right. And so that was one of the things that always comes to mind with Samarra is like, hey, adjacent unit coordination. Wow. Simple things that the Army tells you is probably the stuff that you should be doing.
Yeah. I mean, I remember those days. It was the wild, wild west out there when it came to comms. I was talking to mates of mine, and like literally, they would find out about another unit being in their sector when an IED strike occurred. They would hear the boom and the explosion. They'd send out the QRF to go check it out, and that was their first understanding that there was an outside unit operating in their area. Not good. I guess here's a question, Rob. If you had deployed Blackhawk Company to Samarra, but without the strikers, you would have been a mech infantry brigade. So what does an engagement with the enemy look like with a Bradley versus what you guys brought in Samarra with strikers? What's the difference there?
Significantly restricted, right?
In what way?
Because like think about it this way: when you're looking at strikers have on average Mark 19 and 50 cals, right, which is a much smaller caliber weapon system, and then compared to a Bushmaster, so you talk about 25 Mike high explosive, extreme velocity rounds. Yes, it's a 40 Mike, but it's a grenade launcher. Doesn't have the same amount of velocity. Doesn't have the same penetration. Where as a striker guy, and one of the things that I did, it was a small thing, but one of the things that we did was we put 3 50 cals per platoon, right? Because normally it was a mix. It was 2 and 2. You had 2 50 cals, 2 Mark 19s. We went with 3 50 cals just because a 50 cal is a lot less collateral if you have to shoot into a building, right? Whereas like the Bradley guys could not do that. The tanker guys could not do that. I can't shoot a heat round into a window to neutralize a threat because I'm probably going to destroy the whole building. If I shoot 25 Mike into the side of a building, like I'm going to do much more collateral. Like, yeah, I'm going to kill the bad guys and probably the people behind the building. And so people are going to get hit by shrapnel. And so they were very restricted in what they could do. And the other part of it is they didn't have enough dismounts to do anything with it anyway. Right. And for those of us that are old enough to remember the old FSO rotations at JRTC and NTC, what typically happens when you do the Mount City attack? The infantry makes it there before the armor and they get defeated in detail, or the armor makes it there before the infantry and they get defeated in detail. So it's a combined arms fight. You have to arrive with as much of your gear, both light and mechanized or mounted and dismounted, at the same time to have the best effect. Because, tanks can't seize terrain, or they can, but it's a very, very short period of time because they don't have the assets to secure it, right? I can seize it, but I can't secure it. And in those environments, having secure areas to operate is what's important.
What were some of the challenges when it came to, you get to your patrol base and you guys start operating in Samarra? You went from Kuwait, then you had two NTC rotations, 2 train ups. We'll talk more to Troutman next week about that.
Yeah.
But you had this like very like intensive train up that led up to your deployment. Yet when you hit Samarra, like, were you guys ready for that?
From the tactical perspective, yeah. Like I think, like, and you remember this adage because you're old enough to remember this too, but like some general in the late 90s said like, hey, look, if you're worried about whether or not you trained your soldiers enough before you deployed, you failed as a leader, right? And I carried that with me my whole career, and I would tell people that all the time as well. It's like, look, if there's something that you can do today to prevent somebody from bleeding tomorrow, you probably should do it. And so that's where the training came in. And like Troutman can certainly expand on it from his perspective, but we did, as an organization, we did Millennium Challenge, which was like a small company plus footprint that went to NTC. We did NTC in the fall, and then we did JRTC. And in between each one of those combat CTC rotations, we were out in the field, probably 18 to 24 days a month for a year. And so it was pretty intense. And like, there was no such thing as like an exception to policy for weekend training because you were training on the weekends. Like there was no discussion. Like you didn't go to the G3 and like, hey, sir, can I train tomorrow? Like, no, it wasn't any of that. It's like, we will see you guys on Wednesday, right? We drop you off on a Wednesday. You come back on a Wednesday. That's how the training was done, And that environment really prepared us for that because like when you came back and the Army went to the train ready pool versus the deployment pool, it kind of changed the way things were. And it really made it difficult to manage your personnel and your training, right? Because for especially in Stryker Brigade, because we had a FSR tail for like the first 4 years. So you had field
Mhm.
service representatives that were doing a lot of the maintenance on those vehicles to keep them in top shape. One, because it was a new vehicle and it was still basically under warranty. But the other part of it is people wanted to see it fail. So what's the best way to not have it fail? Have a large contractor footprint to fix everything that could potentially go wrong, while you're deployed. But like from an early deployment perspective, like Samarra was not bad, with the exception of, the incident that we had with the rollover. And that was like, looking at that, losing those three guys, there was nothing that we could have done in that situation to control it, because it was just, it was a erosion ditch that gave away. That could have happened to anybody. As much as we'd like to think that there was, more to it than that, it wasn't. And unfortunately, three very good soldiers were lost in that one. Like, a guy that was, you know, Sergeant Bridges, man, used to get that guy crap about his mustache all the time, but Steve was a outstanding human being, and he was a great leader. And we lost him, and we lost his driver, specialist Chris Wesley. And Wesley, I literally just told him 2 days before, like, man, I can't send you home. His grandmother had passed away, and he was not local parentis. And for those of you that don't know, that means he wasn't raised by his grandmother. Therefore, the Army was not going to, you know, send him home because it wasn't a requirement. And so I literally had told that guy the day before, a couple days before, like, hey man, like, you need to be here for the team. We need you. I understand that your family needs you too, but like, I there's nothing I can do. My hands are tied. I can't send you home. If I could send you home, you'd be on a plane right now. But I couldn't do that, and he passed away. And then Specialist Blickenstaff literally was one of those kids that was like kind of meandering through the Army. And when I came to the company, he was starting to make the turnaround, you know, and unfortunately he died before he got to finish it, which
Yeah.
sucks. But
Yeah.
that was probably the most impactful part of the mission in Samara and Fob Pacesetter and all that other stuff, was just being in that area, you know, and then the stories of, and I won't steal any of Joe's thunder because he tells it way better than I do. But like, after the guys got killed, like, there was all kinds of people that were talking that had no idea. And that was one of the things that shortened the fuse for me quite often, is because, like, I don't mind if you talk about things, but I do mind if you talk about things from a place of knowledge versus a place of ignorance.
Rob, I'm glad you brought it up. And one of the things that I think is like really important is, in your role as a company commander, you probably had missions that night, the next
Yeah,
day.
yeah,
How do
absolutely.
you, as a company commander, strike the balance between getting back out in sector and taking it to the enemy, and also taking care of your troops after they lost three of their teammates? Can you talk to us a little bit about that challenge and how
Yeah,
you work through it?
yeah. The hardest part of it is like, anytime something like that happens, you've got to give the guys that took, whoever in the company took the lump the hardest, has to get a break, right? So what we tried to do is we tried to rearrange the patrol schedule to let third platoon get a couple extra hours, and that's all we could do, is give them a couple of extra hours for morning, you know. And that was a very, very hard situation to deal with, because my first sergeant, who, you know, first sergeant Swift, to this day, is probably one of the greatest NCOs I ever served with. Cooler than the other side of the pillow, funny as hell. And he was on his third combat deployment when, or fourth actually. He's on his fourth combat deployment when he was our first sergeant. So he did Panama as a specialist in 375. He had done Grenada. I'm sorry, he did Panama, Desert Storm, and Somalia. So he had done those three conflicts before he was our first sergeant. So
Mhm.
he was more than adequately prepared for the rigor of combat, but the leadership and the loss of a teammate he had not experienced, like, not at that level. And, you know, going in to identify the guys after they died, my first sergeant's crying. And I'm like, well, how in the hell am I supposed to keep it together when freaking, War Dog over here is losing it?
Mhm.
And in that moment, it was just like, okay, I know what I have to do. and I tell my guys this, and it was something that I would tell people all the time. It's like, look, I can't promise you that you're going to live or die. All I can promise you is that the last person that you will see before you expire is an American soldier pounding on your chest trying to keep you alive. Like, that's the best that I can do, because there's things that are going to be out of my control. But if I can get you to a point where you are, medevaced and somebody is giving you CPR and you expire, at least we've done everything that we could to get you to that point, and then it's out of our hands. And that was that became part of my character. That became part of who I was from that day forward, is just like, hey, look, I will move heaven and earth. I will give up ground to secure a casualty, but make no mistake, if I have to give up ground, I'm killing everybody else that is getting in the way of me getting that casualty to where they need to be. Because, you know, that is the promise that I made my soldiers. It's like, look, like, you will have an American pounding on your chest. That's the best that I can do. And it's very grim and it's dark, but it's the stark reality of combat, particularly when you're operating in austere and remote conditions. You may not have a medevac that's, 3 to 5 minutes away. We didn't have the golden hour in 2004. That wasn't even a consideration, right? You went out there, somebody got shot. You're doing everything that you can to take care of them until you can, like, ground evac them to a forward surgical team, which weren't all over country at the time when, that incident happened.
Yeah. And, I'm sure your medics were trained to the highest level. But as I recall, back in those days, our medical training wasn't anywhere near as advanced
Oh, no.
as it is today. Like, what did a medical what a medic's kit bag look like back then?
Yeah, a medic's kit bag was, typically, like, we started to get stuff later, about midway through the year. So we got quick clot, which was one of those things that came in, and that was interesting. And, like, knowing all the horror stories that came out of using that stuff, like, now you feel bad, like, oh shit, like, I actually made somebody use that. Like, yeah, it saved his life, but it did massive amount of tissue damage, right? And, like, then you're like, hey guys, that's the last resort. The Israeli bandages and all the tourniquets and all those other things, those things kind of trickled in over the course of the year. But at the very beginning, your aid bag was pretty standard. You had a couple of 500 milliliter bags of lactated ringers, maybe 1,000 milliliter bag, some tubing, some needles, and stuff to stop bleeding. It was literally just, ABCs. I got to check the airway, make sure they're not bleeding, make sure they got circulation, and then I move them to the next spot. And we had, with our medical evac vehicles, we had a little bit more, but even still, it wasn't like a rolling hospital. It was literally just enough to stabilize the person until we can get them to the next level of care. It's it was a highly armored FLA. If you've been in the back of a field ambulance, it was basically the same thing. It just had two more wheels and a little bit more gurney space.
Yep. So you and your team overcome that challenge of losing teammates, which is devastating to any unit. And then you get a change of mission and you're heading north up to the city of Mosul. Can you tell me a little bit about your area of responsibility inside of Mosul and how it differed from your patch in Samarra?
No, geez. Yeah. So our area of operation was in, yeah, and Samarra was probably, like, if you think about walking out to your neighborhood and doing the tic-tac-toe square. So, like, your house is the center and then you go around, those are your neighborhoods. They're your neighbors. That's basically our footprint in Samarra. And then we went from, like, the footprint of, basically a small neighborhood with 9 to 10 houses roughly, into a battle space that was probably about the size of downtown Fayetteville. So if you've ever been to Fayetteville, North Carolina, that's about how big our sector was. And literally, our sector didn't even start at the gate of the fob. You drove out, you hit the Yarmouth traffic circle. Once you hit the Yarmouth traffic circle, you drove north, and we hit the Sheikh Fatih Mosque, which was on the left-hand side. You keep going, there was a Mosul Hotel on the left-hand side. You crossed to bridge number 5, and then you were in the 2-3's battle space. But once you cross that, you could cross the bridge and go to the other unit's battle space, or you turn left. And then we went all the way out to the water treatment facility on the western side of Mosul. So we were on basically Highway 1 out of I don't even know what they called the fob now, but from that fob, Yarmouk Traffic Circle, Sheikh Fatih Mosque, all the way out to the water treatment facility on Highway 1 going out towards Syria. And so we had probably, I don't even know, I would say at least 200 to 300 square miles of terrain.
That's for a company, or is that for your battalion?
That was our company sector.
A company sector. And for those who aren't as familiar with the military, how many troops are we talking about with that size of a battle space?
About 175.
175 soldiers for an area of operations that's about the size of Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Yeah.
And far more densely populated than Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Way significantly. Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that was part of it too, is like, and each area was different too. And that's that, like if you were to talk to somebody else that was in a different company in the same battalion area. So look at it this way, the easiest way, like we tried to describe it, but the easiest way to truly describe it is our battalion relieved the 101st Air Assault Division on the western side of Mosul. We took their entire battle space. So the battle space that was run by, General Petraeus and his boys and girls, we took over that entire battle space as a battalion. And then we dropped one company into Old City, which was the super, super tight quarters where you had to walk everywhere. You had one company that had basically from the Yarmouk Traffic Circle to the FOB. And then we had from the Yarmouk Traffic Circle all the way up to basically Highway 1 in Syria.
So just to put some perspective on it, and I don't want to turn this into a grand strategy conversation because that's not what we're about here, but just to put for some perspective, at the time, late 03, early 04, the work that General Petraeus and his teammates were doing up in Mosul was being framed by the Army and by the mainstream media as one of the shining examples of success in theater. Certainly, they had a lot of very good things that were going on up there. But if I'm honest, it seems kind of odd that you would then take that success and basically give it to a battalion, a division to a battalion. Like, is that how you reinforce success? Or am I missing something? Am I being unfair in my kind of judgment there?
Well, I think, let's say, from a strategic standpoint, what it did, it signaled that, like, hey, we're eventually going to leave. Like, if I'm a politician, I'm going to say, hey, look, you had a division here before. Now you have a battalion, right? So we are basically cutting it to a third of the size. We are going to turn over control back to the Iraqis, and they are going to be responsible for their own future. And that briefs well, right? But we all know that the enemy gets a vote. And I think that was one of the significant hiccups of the Iraq campaign, was the fact that a lot of our senior leaders had a lot of hubris. Like, oh, we've got this locked down. Well, yeah, sir. But you also have to realize, regardless of what organization it was from, when you saw a general officer walking down the street, what was not in the frame of that photo was the air weapons team, the freaking 2 rifle companies on the north side of that organization, the rifle company on the south side of the organization, the rifle platoon that was sitting there, engines running for QRF. There's a whole lot of other pieces that the general public did not see. And that, when you're watching this as doing your left seat and right seat ride, you're like, wow, these guys are doing stuff that I personally am not going to do. And for 2 reasons. 1, I don't have the manpower to do things like that. And 2, like, I'm not willing to assume that level of risk. And back to previous comment, because I don't have the manpower, I can't assume that type of risk because I don't have the manpower. And so one of the things that we always did was, we had a flat rule in the company. Like, if you're going out on a daylight patrol, you can go 3 trucks. If you're going out on a nighttime patrol, you have to have 4 trucks. And the reason why you have to have a 4th truck is so, like, if something happens, you can self-recover, because we had tow bars and tow ropes and all that other stuff. But during the day, you can assume a little bit more risk because you can see better. More people are active. There's less people out in sector. So you can basically have your own QRF. And that's what I did as a company commander. Never called the battalion QRF. Not once. It was given to me one time in 12 months, but I never had a battalion. I never wanted the battalion QRF. Like, why? Because I don't want to have to coordinate anything. I can pick up the phone, call my platoon leader, get on the radio and be like, hey man, I need you to meet me here, do this. And there's no additional coordination with that. And I could tell a great and also horrible story about the one time I did get the battalion QRF. And, you know, and not everybody's made the same, you know, even within the same organization. And I would have put my rifle company up against anybody in 04 and 05 and we would have smoked them straight up. Like, you could argue that there were better people and other people. And, you know, ironically, the three best company commanders that were Stryker company commanders in 2003, 2004, all ended up working for Steve Townsend again in 2016. And I don't think that was a mistake, you know, and I'll just leave it there. But
yeah, I mean, I asked the question, Rob, because as you know, we're not part of our project here is we're not going to deliver judgments on decisions that are made by higher ups. You know, you and I are mature enough to recognize that none of those decisions are taken lightly. What I want to do is I wanted to give some context to our listeners, many of whom maybe have never served in the military or didn't serve there during that particular time, to understand the challenge that was being handed to your soldiers.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a massive challenge to be given that level of responsibility and to be given that success.
Yeah, dude, I was 20, 25 years, 28 years old. No, 26. I was 26 years old. Like, really? Like, okay. You know, but that also speaks to, you know, the level of confidence and trust that, you know, our chain of command had in us to like, hey, I'm going to drop you in this big old sector, you and your boys and toys, you're going to take care of it. And, you know, that's the lost secret. That's the thing that people don't see or people don't understand today is like company grade officers and NCOs make the Army work, right? Regardless of who's at the top. If I go to the company organization and give them an assignment and give them guidance and top cover and the resources, they will accomplish it and then some. And that's been my experience, but that's also because those are the teams that I built, you know. And I used to tell that to my lieutenants all the time, like, hey, when you leave here, build the team that you always wanted, right? The Army's going to give you a team, but it may not be the team that you always wanted. So how do you make it the team that you want? You know, you establish standards, you enforce standards, you give people guidance, and then they will deliver for you if you're interacting with them correctly.
What was your platoon's day-to-day like?
Platoon's day-to-day, well, first part of it is, you know, they did. So again, as a company commander, I was the dick at first, but then after about 30 days, they were like, wow, this actually works. So literally my only requirements as a commander was don't miss movement. So if you got a patrol scheduled, you do your patrol. If you are not going outside of the wire, squad leaders at minimum will have a meal with their soldiers and do freaking PT with them. That is a non-negotiable. You will do that. And at first, you know, there's grumblings and gripes like, wow, man, like, why do I got to do this? Blah, 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 blah. But then the first time there was a no notice, no timeline, short extremist move, guess what? That squad leader could reach over and grab all of his dudes because he was at lunch with them. All right, guys, to the trucks. Let's go. Right. And so those were the things. But typically, like I ran my company with a whiteboard. I really did, because we had our sector map. And then what I would do is I literally would just say, okay, we had a rotation. So you would basically do, you know, 3 days of day patrols. You get a day for recovery, and then you do a night patrol, and then you're back on day patrols again. And so that's what I would do. And so again, going back to 3 vehicles during the day, 4 vehicles at night. Your 4th squad, if you were smart, was turning wrenches on your trucks while the other guys were patrolling. And so that's why we always kept the unit was always at, you know, our OR rate was in the 90s the whole year. And the reason why it was in the 90s every year is because I gave the guys time to do maintenance. And so that was part of the routine. So literally it was, you're going to patrol today, patrol tomorrow, probably night patrol, have a recovery day to do maintenance, and then that schedule started over again. And that was basically kind of the way that we did it. Was you'd have 3 days of solid patrolling, a day off, and then you do the same cycle over again. And then one of the other things that I did was I made a consolidated maneuver platoon out of my mortar section and my MGS section. And so what I did was I took my headquarters section and basically mashed them all together. So I had 6 trucks and 2 lieutenants, right? One guy was responsible for, winning the hearts and minds. So he was doing the PAO civil affairs type operations. And then the other guy was in charge of the tactical piece. But when those guys would roll out, same rules as everybody else. 3 trucks in the morning, 2 trucks at night. And so what I basically did was I combined my headquarters and my MGS platoon and made 2 additional platoons for day patrols. So as they were going out 3 vehicles apiece, I could launch those guys to different areas to the battle space to conduct missions. And then when my MGS platoon was running intact, I would strip away an infantry squad. And it's like, hey, look, you're taking a squad from 2nd platoon today. So I'd have my 3 MGS trucks and a truck full of dismounts to go do the job. And again, that's what worked for us. It may not work for you because your terrain could be different or something other than that. But like when we started hitting those steady state operations, that is what worked for us. And it built in maintenance and recovery time. So nobody was effectively burnt out because of op tempo.
How many hours of sleep a day could your guys count on?
Probably 6 to 8. And
That's
that
about
was
right.
Yeah. And that was baked into the schedule though, right? So if you were doing it right, you got plenty of rest. If you're screwed up or you were mismanaged, then you didn't sleep.
Yep. So what you're describing really is a kind of rotation for a task organization and rotation for steady state operations, meaning you're going out and patrol, you're doing that sort of thing. But occasionally you would get missions thrown at you with little to no notice. Some of them were probably based upon intelligence. Could you describe kind of like that and give maybe an example, if you can, of an operation that kind of would give our listeners a little bit of color in terms of what that looks like and what you have to be prepared to do?
Yeah. So again, ran the company off a whiteboard. May not work for you, worked for me. Everybody knew you come in and you knew what your job was for the next raid that we did, right? It was on the board. Those were your rehearsal priorities. If you're 1st platoon, you had the B next to you. That means you were doing breach. If you were in 2nd platoon, you had assault. If you were in 3rd platoon, you were on QRF, and then we'd have the MGS section in the blocking positions because they were basically permanent blocking positions because they had toes. So they had max standoff. You didn't want them too close to the objective. But that's really what we did. So we had a rotational breach assault support element, and everybody knew what that was. And those are your rehearsal priorities for the week. So like if we had a no notice raid, 1st platoon, you guys are the assault platoon. 2nd platoon, you're doing, blocking positions with MGS, and 3rd platoon, you're on QRF. And then it would just rotate one jumper to the left every time. And that's how we kept the entire company involved in the process, because some people like to ride the same horse over and over again. I forced all my horses to be good horses, and so we did that through repetition, because like the first 90 days we were in Mosul, I think our I'd say the first 90 days was basically raid, troop leading procedures, raid, or tactical mission, troop leading procedures, raid, tactical mission. We did, I want to say in that first 30 days after the 101st left, it was probably like an op every night or every other night for about 60 days. And so we hit probably 150, 200 targets in that short period of time. And one of the most memorable ones, and like I had Specialist Talafoa, the guy was a bomb sniffing dog in a previous life because he found so many IEDs when we were downrange. And make no mistake, that is not a slight on that kid. That kid had he had some extrasensory awareness when it came to finding explosives. Don't know why, don't know how. Thankful for it though. So we had a mission where bomb maker, north side, there's an area called Hayatenic. It was a horrible neighborhood full of bad dudes right on the edge of town that was heading towards Syria. So they would come in from Syria, basically take over houses, plan their attacks, and then come deeper into Mosul. And they're like, hey, this guy's a bomb maker. He lives in town. We got to go get him. And my Lieutenant Moreno, I'll never forget it, looks at me and he goes, "Hey boss, like, look, if this guy's got boom in his house, I'm not comfortable doing an explosive breach. So we're going to do a mechanical breach." All right, man, you want to do mechanical? That's fine. But somebody in that stack and the lead fire team will have a flashbang. Like, that's my only requirement. Like, if you're going to pound on this dude's door, have a flashbang ready. And set up outer cordon without a hitch, set up the inner cordon without a hitch. They go to breach the door, boom, hit it with the freaking battering ram, doesn't go in. Hits it a second time with the battering ram, doesn't go in. Hits it a third time with the battering ram, door finally flies open. You know, the target is running up the steps to grab his AK-47 that's sitting outside of his bedroom. Squad leader or team leader throws a flashbang in, goes off like right next to old boy's head, roll him up, start clearing the house. We go clear into the courtyard. I don't want to claim like, oh my gosh, we found the first house-borne IEDs, but we found a pile of bricks in the center of this guy's courtyard that had Simtex underneath it. It was about 100 pounds of it. If that would have cooked off, it would have killed all of us, more than likely. And we had some other agency folks with us. I can't remember who they were off the top of my head, but they were like, "Yep, that's actually Simtex, so y'all all need to get back." And they neutralized and made it safe. And then, running joke, but we called in our supply sergeant, Sergeant Smith. We called him Task Force Smith. He never got the joke. But Task Force Smith comes rolling in. We upload all the stuff that goes boom in the back of his LMTV, and we're like, "Smitty, you leave from here, you follow those strikers, go straight to the freaking Kaha. Do not pass go, do not collect $200. So he follows those dudes in, they get in there, and they did a controlled det that night of all the explosives. And it literally, we were still on the objective by the time he got back. And when they cooked that thing off, we heard it in town. It was that big of a boom. And Smith comes to me and he goes, "Hey, sir, like, don't ever do that to me again." Like, "Do what?" Like, "I gave you your own task force. I don't know what you're complaining about." He's like, "Sir, you had me drive back all those explosives in an LMTV." It's like, would you have been comfortable driving back all those explosives in an LMTV if I would have told you you had 150 pounds of something that could blow up? And so, it became a running joke, like, hey, we called it Task Force Smith. And because he was Arthur Smith the third, we called it Task Force Smith. Like, come here, man. Like, you've got some stuff for us to do. But, those were the moments of levity amongst all the moments of like pucker factor that we had. And, everybody contributed. I made sure that every person in my company, and it wasn't because I'm like, oh, everybody's got to get into a gunfight. We just had an op tempo where everyone in the company earned every combat award that they received. And that was because we made sure with the op tempo that we had that everybody was getting exposed to the battle space. And so there's no way that they're not going to get exposed to it, because of that.
Yeah. It was during this time, as we said during the intro, that the influence of the foreign fighters, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, started to be felt in Mosul. When were some of the first indicators that that was going to become a major part of your campaign for the rest of the time? And what kind of unique threat did that really pose, a challenge that it posed to you and your troops?
Yeah. So one of the things that was a big fear and like, it was a big thing early, it kind of died off and then it happened again. So if everybody remembers Malpin that disappeared, right? The I don't know if he was like, I don't 100% know the guy's background and it escapes me now because it was so long ago, but like this kid disappears, dust one, everybody's looking for him, right? Everybody always, everybody knows about old boy in Afghanistan that took off, right? Like that, like kidnappings were a real threat, right? And that was a problem. Like kidnappings were a real threat because that was a coercion tactic that the Taliban were using. Taliban, AQI, whatever flavor you want to call it, of Al Qaeda in Iraq, right? And there were people that were naive enough to think, and there are people still to this day in the military that served the same time that we did, that did not believe that Al Qaeda was in Iraq in 2003. And it's like, but if you know the history of Al Qaeda fought the Russians in the 80s. So it is not impossible for some offshoot variation or some type of flavor of that organization to still survive into the 2000s. And, the 4th of August, and again, I will steal zero thunder from that because I think you'll have a much more interesting conversation with Joe about it because of the amount of research that he did. But the 4th of August, we saw the ISIS flags, dudes in the black PJs, highly organized, highly equipped, fighting in downtown Mosul on August the 4th of 2004. And that was kind of like the underpinning of everything else that was going on at that point. And it was ramping up to that, and like, yeah, there were times where, the 24th of June was right before, if you remember, if you're old enough to remember the transfer of authority, right? Like, hey, we're going to transfer authority to the Iraqis on June the 26th. That was the date. They did it quietly on the 25th because the world went sideways. And that was the day that, they took over the Sheikh Fatih Mosque and released all the criminals that were in jail. So like unknown group of foreign fighters came in, cut the lock, said, hey, here's weapons, go shoot at the Americans. Right. And that was like the first inkling of it. And then it just continued to ramp up to that point until the 4th of August when they tried to kidnap the mayor of Mosul's kid and they outposted Highway 1, from the old city all the way out to Syria to basically kidnap the mayor of Mosul's son and blackmail him into being a sympathizer for Al Qaeda. And that was a long day. That was the longest firefight in the brigade. We fought probably 16 and a half to 17. I would say 16 and a half active gunfight. We're outside of the wire for about 18 hours of that. And, that was one of the biggest gunfights in the Army since Blackhawk down, and nobody knows about it. And that's part of the reason why Joe wanted to capture the story in the book that he wrote, because like people were like, when our captains or our lieutenants went to the career course and they were talking about all the stuff that happened while they were in Mosul, one of the responses that they got from their classmates was like, there's no way that happened because it never made the news. Right. And that was part of it. And so there was a huge gap in messaging. Right. And we're on the very cusp of where we are today, where like information about the war is readily accessible. Whereas before it was very controlled, and that part of it is, it's tough, right? Because you have to think like, I want to keep people coming into recruiting stations and joining the military. There was a lot of patriotism after 9/11 that did not die off until probably the mid 2010s. Right. There were people. We had a guy that worked on Wall Street, quit his job on Wall Street as a stockbroker and was a sergeant in our brigade. Why? Because, hey, I was in New York City when the towers went down. I want to get a piece of this. So you had people that did that, and there's quite a few people that were like that. And how do you keep those people coming in with the numbers when, there's people getting maimed and injured and killed, from IEDs and gunfights and this, that, and the other thing. So it's like, how do I maintain that? And how do I, cast things in a positive light? Oh, by the way, when there's an election year coming up, right? Like that's the other part. Midterm elections and freaking election years drastically impact the tactics on the ground level, and it absolutely shouldn't, but it 100% does.
Yep.
And I can say that because I saw the strategy change during the global war on terrorism 3 times. So I was deployed for 3 election cycles during my time in the military. So I deployed 2004, which was re-election campaign for George Bush. I was in Afghanistan in 2008 when Barack Obama got elected. And then I was in Iraq a second time or a third time when Donald Trump was elected. And each one of those elections had different repercussions for the people that were operating on the ground because of changes in policies, or just a simple fact like, hey, we got to stop operations until after January because the old guy doesn't want to do anything to get any egg on his face. And the new guy doesn't have all of his appointees in place to pull the trigger. So where's the balance, And so you would see strategic leaders like shut stuff down. Like, hey, we're not doing any operations until January 1st, until we get a read on what the administration wants to do. or the embassy would basically, shut down because they're all fearing for whether or not they're going to be, remain in their politically appointed job versus doing their actual job, which is like furthering the outcomes of the, in the absence of guidance, you execute. So if the president is new, you continue to operate your previous guidance until new guidance comes out. But there are a lot of people that will use that as an excuse to like basically turtle up and not do anything. And
then you add on top of that, Rob, the complexities of the Iraqi political process. There were Iraqi elections and there were Iraqi politics that were happening, and that absolutely shaped your tactics. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. And this isn't even Iraq, but I can tell you we stopped operations in Afghanistan for freaking 4 months. Hey guys, no white phosphorus. What? Why can't I shoot white phosphorus? Because it's pine nut season. If you burn up the pine nut season, you're killing the only cash crop that the Afghans have. Don't shoot white phosphorus because you can destroy things. You can shoot HE because the HE will help harvest the pine nuts because it'll knock them off the freaking branches. But if you shoot white phosphorus and the pine nuts catch on fire, we're going to have an economic crisis on our hands. That 100% happened, right? And so that clearly happened more than we would like to think. And that's the sad part of it is it's like when people are honest about what was going on. Yeah. Were there tactical mistakes that people made? Yes. Were there strategic mistakes that people made? 100%. Operationally, yeah. Guess what? You can't fight for 20 years and not make a mistake. Like that's human nature. You can't live for 20 years and not make a mistake. Go 20 years without speeding. I would try anyone to, if you're honest with yourself, you know that there's a point where like, oh crap, even if it was incidentally, oh, I went 26 into 25, right? These things happen. It's just organic as part of who we are.
Rob, we're going to pivot a little bit and we're going to talk about you because you are the person that led the troops. You're the person that made a lot of difficult decisions. And we want to take a step back now and talk about the man, Rod Robinson. And I think it's important for people to know you grew up in the Army. You tell me a little bit about that and about your dad in particular and what impact did he have on you in terms of shaping your decision to join the military?
Yeah. So, first and foremost, like I will say this, that the military was a calling for me. Being a leader in the military was exactly where I was supposed to be at the exact time that I was doing it. And, whether you call it karma, you call it fate, you call it a calling, whatever it is, like I was put in the exact position that I needed to be. I grew up as a NCO's kid. So my dad did 27 years in the Army. He retired in 99. I carried the torch for 2 years before my old man walked across the stage and retired. And in that time, I was born in Columbus, Georgia. We PCS to the Panama Canal Zone. We lived in Aurora, Colorado when my dad was a recruiter. If you don't know where that is, it's a small town outside of Denver. And then we came back to Georgia, and my dad was at Fort Benning from 1981 till 1989. And so he basically had every job at Fort Benning minus a drill sergeant. And he culminated at 10th Mountain back when before 10th Mountain made the move to Watertown. Like that's how old that was. And so my old man was very influential in the fact that you always wanted to be high bearer of standards and you always want to take the opportunities to, get education, do better for your people. Now, all that being said, my dad was also a do as I say, not as I do type of non-commissioned officer. And that shit kind of died in 1989, right? Like we've got to get away from that. And we're trying to now, but we're also putting NCOs in a really bad space too, right? Because like my envisionment of a non-commissioned officer is the guy that my dad was, like the master trainer, Pathfinder, jump master, EIB, very proficient at his soldier task and drills, can do all, do everything. Like if I needed a platoon sergeant to get stuff done, my dad absolutely could be that guy. Was he a dad? No. He was a great provider. He was a great leader of soldiers. He was a terrible leader of his family. And that's one of the things I learned from him is like, you have to be able to strike balance with everything that you do, But when you look at my growing up, like, dude, I don't know how many times I did events at Fort Benning, going out of the 34-foot tower, watching the Rangers in action demos, like doing all the things that, and this is even back before they even had the Ranger Training Brigade. This is back when it was still the Ranger Department. And, for me, bit me in the butt in the 90s too, because my dad's, one of my dad's first sergeants had a dual standing in the National Guard. So when he retired, they promoted him to major. And so Major, formerly Sergeant Major Wayne Littlejohn, who is in the Ranger Hall of Fame, was my ROTC instructor in high school. I got no breaks, right? So I got it from my dad and I got it from him. And so, like, being held to the standard was something that always happened to me, right? And anytime I fell short of the standard, I was corrected by many people, but what that did is that baked into me the ability to say, okay, something's not right about this. I need to speak up. Right. Because if I let a standard, it's a simple rule, man. And we hear it all the time and it sounds like BS. And they tell you this at the academy and you're like, oh, this is horseshit. I don't want to hear this. Right. It's, hey, when an officer walks by a discrepancy and he doesn't make an on the spot correction, that becomes the new standard. Right. And we say that. But how many people actually take action and make that correction? Not very many. Not very many NCOs are that person. Not very many officers are that person. Well, I don't want to be a bad guy. Like, look, every organization has to have a heavy. You would prefer that the heavy be the first sergeant or the command sergeant major, but I can tell you that role has shifted a lot. And the reason why that role has shifted a lot is because NCOs have gone away from training to advising. And, I don't know if I like it or I don't like it, but I can tell you this much. Like, the NCOs that were like, well, I'm the senior advisor to the commander. Those are the dudes that I flamed with impunity and treated like shit. And the reason why I treated them like shit, because they weren't doing your job. You are the primary enlisted trainer of this organization. Prove me wrong. And that has always been an issue. And people always ask me, like, man, like, you are quick to jump into somebody's butt about stuff. And it's like, yeah, because you have to think the NCO that was my example was my dad. And if I'm willing to get into it with my old man, I have no problem getting into it with you.
What did your old man think about you going to West Point?
He was proud, but also jealous. And I say that in the sense that my father started a commissioning program in the 70s. He went to a very, very small school called Prairie View A&M. If you're from Texas, you know exactly where that is. So he went to Prairie View. Believe it or not, my dad went to college with Mr. T. That's a story for another time. But he was in ROTC and he wasn't a strong writer. And so when he got to the basic course, they basically told him, it's like, hey man, we're willing to keep you in the Army because you're physically fit and you're talented, but you don't have the intellectual capacity to be an officer. Right. And that's probably a scathing indictment on the educational system of the 60s and 70s. Like, like, not going to deny that my dad didn't grow up black during the civil rights movement. Right. So that may have been part of it. It may not have been. I don't know. Knowing what I know of my father, it was not a racism thing. It was because he was not a very intellectual person. However, if you choose to be the victim, that becomes your excuse. And so that's kind of the way I looked at it. But, growing up, like, you got a lot of exposure. And the real good thing about it was because of my dad early in my career, I picked up a lot of mentors a lot sooner because of the positions that he was in, if that makes any sense. So as as a young cadet at West Point, go out to Hawaii for the summer, and, Ron Clark worked with my dad when he was in the G3 shop in the 25th in like 96. That guy's like now a multi-commanding general, right? Whether you like the guy or not, that's where he's at. My dad worked with him. Terry McKendrick, if you've ever been to Georgia Military College, he's my dad's commander. When when he was in Florida, my dad worked Florida and Hawaii. My dad worked for General Brooks. He worked for Vince when he was the G3 at 3rd Army. So I picked up all those guys as mentors along the way because, one, I went to West Point. Two, they knew my dad, and they were like, hey, in typical fashion, like, hey, if I know somebody, I'm going to look out for, son, daughter, brother, whatever. And if they're doing the right thing, makes it easy to take care of them, And so I had a lot of informal mentors that were watching me from the outside looking in, waiting for me to mature and grow in the Army because they served with my dad. And like, that was honestly one of the great parts of, serving with him at the time that he was in.
Why the infantry, Rob? What made you, as a firstie, choose the infantry branch?
So, I mean, I knew early, like in middle school, I was like, I'm going to be an airborne ranger when I grow up. I knew that's what I wanted to do. I didn't know what branch it was going to be in, but I knew that, having a ranger tab was something that I wanted to do. Jumping out of planes was something that I wanted to do. And it became one of those things. And the irony of it is like, you remember Hank Kersey. If you remember Hank, he was the DMI instructor when we were there. He was like the senior guy. And he and I basically have the same background, right? Dad was an infantry guy, grew up in Columbus, got commissioned, warrior. And like having a conversation with Colonel Kersey one day. And if you remember him, like that guy could give a motivational speech that would make you want to punch a baby in the face, right? So, having a conversation with him one day, and I don't know if it was either at Buckner or during one of the DMI discussions, like, hey, here's your branch information brief or whatever, and listening to him talk. And it's like, man, I want to be like that guy, So it was just another one of those leaders that show up and kind of have influence on you, And ironically, at one point later in my career, I got to meet his son. So his son, Kent, branched infantry and spent some time in the Army, and I got to serve with him. So that was kind of a cool full circle moment for that. And, informal mentorship kind of thing that formulated. And like when he ran for office, he reached out to me and was like, hey man, do you mind like writing me an endorsement or whatever? It's like, whatever you need, man, just let me know. And so that's how these, again, we say it all the time, this is how the West Point network functions, right? But that network is both sides, both officers and NCOs. If you're a quality person, people are looking out for you. I mean, that's really what it is. You've got to bring something to the table in order for people to want you around.
So I'm going to go off script here a little bit, and I'm going to ask you a potentially controversial question. You can make one reform about West Point. What would it be?
One reform, go back to being an engineering college.
Why is that?
Because they've transitioned into liberal arts, and the officers that I see coming out of West Point now are weaker and less intelligent than the ones when we had hardcore engineering as a requirement at the school.
I think that a lot of people will be surprised by that answer because I think a lot of people still believe that West Point is an engineering school.
And that's because they're not tied in, and that's part of it. But like, since they added liberal arts to the curriculum and added more civilian instructors, and I'm not saying that that's bad. However, your core competency is to fight and win wars. Like a history degree, and I know some history majors from West Point that did a great job, but guess what they had? A damn engineering track underneath it, right? And that's the thing. Like, I don't even care if it's systems engineering or econ or like, you have to have some kind of combination of engineering because engineering has a hard answer, right? And that's the thing that makes it difficult. Like, if you are a liberal arts major, all you're trying to do is get peer approval.
Yeah.
Peer approval leads to groupthink. Groupthink is not a good thing in the military because if everybody says, oh, it's okay if we go down this route, you're going to have a whole bunch of dead people, right? But if you have that one guy that says, hey, we sent 5 trucks down here and 4 of them didn't come back, that's an 80% failure rate. Let's find another way, right? That's the way I look at it. Like, somebody can tell me that I'm wrong, but I can tell you that the West Point officers that I encountered that weren't engineers academically were not very good leaders because their problem solving skills were gone. They didn't know how to problem solve. They weren't intelligent. And people would say, well, they're emotionally intelligent. And I can fight a whole war on that and write a dissertation about why I think emotional intelligence is a stupid term and we shouldn't use it. Bottom line is, our court system has established that there is a difference between being an emotional and being intelligent. So like if I come home, somebody's in my house, I freak out, I pull out a firearm, I shoot that guy in self-defense. They're like, oh, that is a crime of passion. He was heated up. He killed the guy. Same person, I go to his house, plan out how I'm going to get in, how I'm going to get out, and then I kill that guy. I'm going to prison for the rest of my life because that was premeditated murder. So you can't be emotional and intelligent at the same time because those two things don't function. They're incongruent. And that is why I do not like that term. Like self-awareness, perfectly okay with, reading the room, perfectly okay with, but emotional intelligence is just a cop-out for weak people so they can throw temper tantrums.
So I propose a follow-up episode to discuss that in more detail because that's very interesting. Rob, I want to be respectful of your time, so I want to go back to Fort Lewis, or maybe it was Kuwait. You correct me on my chronology. You take command of the company before you're heading down to Iraq. Talk to me about that process and talk to me about what happened.
Okay. So that's an interesting thing because again, never ever in my life did I think I would assume command, right? I did not have a change of command ceremony before I took BICO. So what happened was we had a guy, and to his credit or fault, I don't know which one, he was not very good as a leader. And he was more concerned about his personal growth and personal safety and protection than he was about leading soldiers. And it showed in everything that the company did. BICO was probably, they certainly were the worst ones in the battalion, maybe one of the worst ones in the brigade. Probably if they weren't at the bottom, they were very close to the bottom. And the soldiers, if you've seen Band of Brothers, they sold them, right? The NCOs basically ponied up, walked into the battalion commander's office and was like, hey, sir, we can't work with this dude. If this guy goes down range with us, you're going to fill body bags. We don't trust him. He's tactically incompetent. He's not technically proficient. He's going to get people killed.
And just to be clear here, this was right before the company was getting ready to ship out. So they were facing combat.
They literally were loading. They literally had already loaded the connexes. Everything that the battalion had, everything that the company had was in containers and on ships. So they had zero equipment. The only thing that we were carrying were personal weapons and stuff like that. And the NCOs, to their credit, man, 100% to their credit, walked in, took some intestinal fortitude and walked into the battalion commander's office and was like, hey, sir, look, we cannot deploy with this dude. He is going to get people killed. And then how that affected me was, hey, yeah, you're going to take command early. And I was like, okay, well, what does that mean? January downrange, February downrange? It was one of those kind of things, right? And so it was like, hey, you need to be able to do this. And I was like, okay, whatever. So it was kind of grumbling, but I didn't know it was going to happen. And then we had a display. We're doing a static display of all the strikers. And General Soriano, who is the commander, the division commander, for lack of a better term, he's the 2-star commander at Fort Lewis, comes up to me and he goes, hey, Rob, are you ready? Ready for what, sir? He's like, oh, you haven't talked to Colonel Rounds yet, have you? I was like, nope. Don't know what's going on. And he talked to Colonel Rounds, got a chairman of the Joint Chiefs coin, which is cool. So the chairman of the Joint Chiefs was checking out the strikers. I got a coin because I was standing next to my vehicle when he walked by. And, later on that day, Colonel Rounds was like, hey, man, I'm going to call you this weekend, so be by your phone. I'm flying to a jiu-jitsu tournament in California, get a call from the old man. Boss man goes, hey, you're taking command on Tuesday. Enjoy your weekend. I came back, showed up, and they were like, hey, congratulations. You are now the commander of BICO. And they handed the guide on from first sergeant to battalion commander to me, back to the first sergeant. The other guy wasn't there, and I was the commander of BCO about 18 days before we went to Iraq.
I don't think that anyone who's been through that process, assuming command of a company, can really appreciate just how big of a deal that is for you to do so right before you're shipping out for combat. I mean, that had to have put a charge into you. Sure, I'm sure you were excited, and of course you were ready. Obviously, I think your deployment proved that out. But that's a lot to ask of a young officer. It's also a lot to ask of your troops to basically put their trust into you. They don't know you, most of them. What was that like, earning their trust? And what was it like? How did you go about doing that in such short order?
So two things happened. So the first thing was I had some advocates for me, right? So going back to Sergeant Bridges. So I had worked with Steve. He was a battalion ammo dude before he took a squad in BCO. And so I'd worked with Sergeant Bridges for about a year. And Sergeant Wheeler, who was, he was my company commander's RTO when I was a lieutenant. And so Sergeant Wheeler was in the company. I re-enlisted Sergeant Wheeler, and I came down to the company, and they were like, "Oh, who are we getting? Like, we don't know this new guy." And Sergeant Wheeler's like, "I know him. He's a good dude. He'll take care of us. Like, he's kind of a wild card, but he'll take care of us." And then Sergeant Bridges was like, he's a good officer. He's like, anything is better than E-Step, and he will be significantly better. And so I had two people advocate for me. And then after I took command, I gave my first safety briefing before the guys went out on block leave. And I basically gave them a safety briefing that an infantry officer should give. Like, hey, man, don't get drunk. Don't sleep with somebody that's not your spouse unless you're single. And if you're single, make sure the other person is single. Don't be an idiot. We need you. We are about to deploy. Bring your asses back. And when I gave them that, they were all like, the sigh of relief that came from those guys. And it wasn't like the actual physical one, but you could see like the tension in the room went down, because they're like, oh my gosh, we actually we got a grunt. We got a guy that understands us, And so that helped a lot, but like having people advocate for me was probably the better part of it as well.
How did you control stress while you were in Samarra and while you were in Mosul? You guys were given a huge responsibility. How did you keep the boys and girls? I'm assuming you had some women in your formation.
We had like two.
Okay. So how did you how did you they decompress?
So when we were in Samarra, we got a box. Like the New York Yankees sent us a bunch of fitted baseball hats. And I don't know if it was from like the Yankees or some other store or something, but like we had a whole box of Yankee hats. And I was like, all right, you can wear your baseball hat. If you're sitting in your truck underneath cover, wear a baseball hat. So they got to do that. And like that was stress relief until one of my NCOs was standing outside of his truck and the boss man's helicopter flew over. And then we get a nasty call like, hey, who the F is in patrol base wearing freaking baseball hats? So then we had to take the baseball hats off. And then when we got to Mosul, basically the rule was if you're inside the hedge coast, you could wear whatever you wanted. So we had all different kinds of varying uniforms. And it was like, if a guy got a t-shirt from back home or a baseball hat or whatever, they were allowed to wear it inside the company compound. If you stepped outside of the company compound, you had to have your big boy clothes on. So you had to be in PT uniform or some variation of the 57 different flavors of DCUs that we had. So those were the rules. And then the other thing that we did, because I'm a jujitsu guy and a combatives dude. So we had open challenge. So if you had beef with anyone in the organization, you could freaking literally throw down on the mat, on the grass, in the company area, on the concrete, in the gym. It didn't matter. What mattered is like you were settling your differences through a means of physicality that wasn't going to hurt or kill anyone. And so we regulated that activity in the company, and it did two things for us. One, it prepared the guys. So like if you got into a scuffle, you actually could fight because, 90 to 95% of people in the military never get in a fight until they get punched in the face in combatives, right? That's just the way it is. And then the other part of it is once you get punched in the face and you realize like, oh, this isn't going to kill me, now I can continue to fight and I can fight a little bit harder. And so having that type of environment fostered, and it sounds so lame to say it, like it fostered esprit de corps in the company, but that's what actually happened is like, the company got tighter and everybody knew that like, hey, look, like we're some tough dudes. We prove it all the time. Like, why? We fight everyone. We fight the bad guys. We fight each other. We'll fight you if you cross us, and like that became part of our identity. And so everybody knew like, hey, if you see those dudes from BCO, they would just as soon choke you out as they will shoot you because that's who they are. And it was a combat multiplier, and it was discipline too, and we had people that were like, oh my gosh, these guys are out of control because they're wearing, basketball shorts and baseball hats. Okay. And you're an idiot. Do you not put on comfortable clothes when you come home from work?
Yeah. I remember when I was a platoon leader, my NCOs who were, coming up in the Army in the 80s, they would tell me about the old days of like settling your disputes in the wood line. That was like something they talked about a lot. I never saw it in my time, but that was something that the NCOs back in the day, and they thought it was great. They thought that was a very healthy way of dealing with problems because it got settled right then and there.
It's taking care of it at the lowest level possible, right? And like that was the thing. It's like, look, I used to tell my guys, don't do anything illegal, immoral, or too embarrassing that I can't help you out of it. Because if it's any of those three categories, I can't help you, right? I'm throwing the book at you, maxing you out on UCMJ, chips fall where they may. Like, sorry. If it's not that way, then we've got something that we can work with.
Yeah.
And and that gives like the easiest way to be successful. If you're listening to this and you are thinking about serving or you are serving and you are a junior military leader, top cover and guidance. If you do those two things, you will be successful for the first 10 years of the Army. This is what I expect of you. And then take care of your people if they make a mistake. Like, hey, sir, I told them to do that. We got to do some retraining. My bad. Let me take this on. I'll correct it. I don't need you to be involved. Right? Because when you let colonels and sergeants major and majors get involved in your company business, you're losing your company. Like that is your fortress. Like you are the boss. Be the boss. And if you're not, it shows. And so from that part of it, that's that's one of the lessons learned. And the other part of it is like two things can be true at the same time. Right. And that's that is a very, very hard thing for people in the military to understand because we think there's always black and white, and the shades of gray is two things can be true at the same time. Like, hey, guess what? I don't want to get in a gunfight. I don't want to kill anybody, but I have that capacity for violence. And those two things are simultaneously happening every time you go out on patrol. Like, no, I don't want to shoot anybody, but I need to be prepared to shoot somebody and I have to be able to live with the consequences because if I don't, the repercussion is I can lose one of my own. And that is something that, critical thinking skill that is not very apparent in society writ large and not very apparent in the way that the reactions of, certain things that happen in the public eye, the way people act. Because if you truly thought like, hey man, like, look, I have to protect my own from bad outcomes. Yes. But I also have to understand that I am just as capable of creating that bad outcome. Then you probably would have a better decision-making process because at the very least, you're holding yourself accountable rather than letting other people hold you accountable. And then it's a surprise. Like, remember when we went years, and this is how old we are, guys. So sorry. But we went years in the military where, company grades didn't get block checks. And like people found out for the first time in their life that they sucked as an officer when they were a major. Like, oh my gosh, I got a center mass. How did that happen? Like, dude, you didn't know you were terrible? Like nobody told you, and that was always a surprise. It shocked me when people found that out. Like, oh my gosh, I got a center mass. Like you didn't realize you were the center mass, dude. Like, and again, it goes back to that self-awareness piece, right? Because if you're self-aware, You know if you're making the cut or you don't. You know, if you're self-aware, you know that you didn't get an award that you put on a piece of paper to get you an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
You know it if you're self-aware. But if you're a lying, cheating dumbass, you do that stuff anyway because, oh, well, nobody will know because, you know, people aren't going to ask that many questions. Like, no, 100% people are going to ask questions. Guy like me, I'm going to ask a question like, hey, man, what gives? You know? And it's like, just be honest. Like, it blows my mind the number of veterans that get themselves caught up because they just don't tell the truth, you know? And like, yeah, everybody has their moments. Everybody tells a fishtail every now and then. Like, yeah, man, like we got into a gunfight and there's 5,000 RPGs. Okay, it's probably like 5, but okay, whatever. Like those are things like little details like that get fuzzy over time. You know, unless you have a bunch of people, and we're going to plug Troutman again, but like unless you have an entire group of people that come together and provide you input to write the story, you're writing the story from your perspective or the best that you can recall it. However, when somebody says, hey, I earned said award or not, you know if you got it or not. Like, why? Because everybody has a damn I Love Me book. Pull the thing out, like, surprise, surprise, it's not in there. You know, and you're doing the rest of us a disservice. You're spitting on the graves of all the people that actually got hurt, or the dude that didn't get a Bronze Star for whatever reason, posthumously, or, you know, whatever reason it was. Like, for you to claim something that you didn't get is a disservice for all the people that should have gotten it, that were in a similar situation, but they didn't. And you may be the reason for that because, like, ooh, we can't trust these guys because they're going to go out and freaking do something dumb. So we're just not going to award it to anyone.
Why do you think that today being proud of your service and being proud of what you did isn't enough? What puts pressure on veterans to
monetization, veteranpreneurship, right? That's part of the problem. The two problems are, honestly, is because not enough people have served in the military. That's the first part. The second part of it is, you know, the largest group of entrepreneurs in the country are military veterans, which is great, right? Like, I appreciate a guy that's got a good hustle. Like, we all have it. You know, everybody's got a side hustle or primary hustle or both, and that's okay. But the number of Bronze Stars on your chest don't make you any more or less effective than the person that you have in your heart, right? Everything on the left side of your chest is shit that I used to do, right? That's all that it is. Like, unless you are actively doing it, like, yeah, I'm very, very proud of my service as a paratrooper in the airborne, right? However, if I'm not actively throwing somebody out of an aircraft, my master wings are just a trinket, right? Your Bronze Star is just a trinket that captures, you know, that period of time that the write-up is, you know, the period of performance on that award. And that's it. And if you don't have that, then there's no reason to embellish it. Like, why? Because you served. Like, hey, man, like, I have people that, you know, friends of ours, classmates of ours that are butthurt because they never got CIBs. Well, you made choices, man. Like, you were in first group, you know, and first group was in Africa, and they didn't turn GWAT on in Africa for years, right? So you were just like, most awards in the Army, particularly the combat ones, are luck and timing, right? You're in the right time and you were lucky that you survived. Like, that's it. Like, you survived through that contact. And so there's a lot of people that are wearing combat awards that they didn't earn because it became an awards machine. You know, the great CIB factory started probably after the surge in Iraq and after the surge in Afghanistan. And so people were out there hunting for awards. And the truth of the matter is, if you were truly a leader of soldiers, you would give all that shit back to bring all your people home. And like that's my going in position. If somebody was like, hey, look, if I could bring back, you know, all the guys that were lost, the families that were impacted, the people that grew up without their dad, you know, I would give every award back to the Army if I could bring that person back so they could live a full life.
Well, Rob, It's a great segue into our final kind of question before we cut you loose. And I want you, we have a lot of folks in this audience, military, veterans, hopefully policymakers, people are just interested in conflict. What do you want them to remember about the soldiers that you led in 2004? What's important for them to take away?
Like, it was the most unforced, culturally diverse organization ever. Like, you don't have to, diversity is not something that should be forced. Diversity is something that happens organically when you put people in the same place and you focus on the mission. You're focusing on the mission, doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, doesn't matter what your background is. Never once in the entire time as a commander did I look over my shoulder and go, ooh, I really hope that white guy covers my 6 when we're in this gunfight, right? Because combat does not discriminate based off of your cultural background. And I think that's something that, the Army is going through pendulum swings right now. And those swings would not be as drastic if we focused in on the mission and taking care of the people, right? If we do those two things, and it's the old saying that, your old NCOs from the 70s and 80s told you, they told me the same thing. Hey, mission first, men always, right? You have to strike that balance of being able to accomplish your mission and take care of your soldiers. If you are doing that, nothing else matters. Like, nothing else matters. Like, yeah, hey, you know what? You may not be, the next general of the Army, but you know what you will be? You'll be remembered like, hey, that guy truly cared about soldiers. Like, he would go to the mat for his kids. Like, 100%, I know that, guaranteed. Lock it in. And that is the most important part. And then I'm going to dovetail on that and add one more thing. And then the other piece of it is mentorship, right? And there are a lot of military people that need mentorship. There are junior military officers right now, today, that need somebody to step in and be like, hey, man, you might want to think about this. Like, why? In my experience, it could be something as simple as, hey, look, if you are planning to have a dog the entire time you are in the military, do everything that you can to avoid OCONUS assignments. Because it's going to be stressful for you. It's going to be stressful for your dog. That's it. Like, that's a very simple piece of guidance, but it's something to think about, right? The other part of it is ask the deeper question too. Like, hey, man, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Where do you see yourself after the military? What's your next job? What's your next move? I don't know. Well, let's talk about it. What do you want to do? What do you like to do? And I don't think I went probably 10 years without a mentorship discussion. I think most of the time I was a battalion XO, I didn't get mentored, for 2 reasons. 1, I was the 2IC. 2, my boss was too busy trying to lead the organization. And 3, of all officers in the Army, battalion XO does not have an NCO counterpart, right? So you don't have somebody to grab you and be like, hey, sir, like, you are really missing target right now, right? So the hope is that you're just doing it right as best as you can. And then, when I got to the senior staff levels again, I had somebody pull me aside and say, hey, what's your legacy? And I was like, well, that's pretty easy, sir. Like, what do you mean? Like, I pushed this guy to success. This guy went to warrant officer school. I got sergeant's major, that worked for me. I've got people all over the Army that I've left my impact on. So I think I'm good. And when I said that, Colonel looks at me and he goes, you might be the first person that I have talked to that actually can articulate it. Now, that's not good on me. That's a scathing indictment of all these senior leaders that don't mentor their troops of all flavors, whether it be officer or NCO.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, Rob, because I think that a lot of people don't even know what a real mentor is, right? Like, I think sometimes people see mentors as an opportunity to help them get to the next level or the next job. I think oftentimes the best mentors I've had are always the ones who pointed out my flaws.
Yeah.
Right? That the ones who told me that my stuff stinks.
Oh,
And there are a surprisingly number of senior officers and senior NCOs, in my experience, I can only speak from my own personal experience, that are unwilling to have those conversations. Because I work hard and I'm on the team and I'm doing things, to help them. But like, that's what you need. You need someone in your life to be able to say, these are the things that you're not doing. And I don't know. I've always felt that the Army just didn't do a good job of defining mentorship.
Well, the Army tried it, and everybody it turned into a it stopped being a thought exercise and just became a check the block, right? Remember when we started doing 360 assessments?
Oh yeah.
The purpose of the 360 assessment was to have somebody above you, somebody below you, and somebody at the same rank to tell you like, hey man, like you are really good at this. You are really bad at this. If you're self-aware, you know the things that you're bad at. You just don't want to be told, right? Like that's the thing. Like most people know what they're not good at, but they just don't want to be told about it. But the other part of it is making people understand that, like, you know, all those phrases that used to work when we were kids in the Army, like disagreement doesn't mean disrespect.
Right.
So if my boss tells me like, hey man, like you really missed target on this. Oh, okay, sir. Like, well, how do I adjust this? How do I freaking fix myself so I don't do it again? And it's the hubris of both the leader and the follower that are not willing to take constructive criticism, right? And when you grow up in a culture of evaluation, right? So, and I think that's part of the reason why being in the airborne is so hard, right? Because if you show up to the 82nd or you show up to the 11th Infantry Division, there are requirements. You're a sergeant. You're going to jump master school. That is no question. If you don't want to go to jump master school, that's an indicator of your performance, right? Hey, you're an infantry lieutenant. Why don't you have a ranger tab? Well, sir, you know what? It didn't work out for me. When are you going back? I don't want to go back. That's an indicator of your performance. Hey, I used to know guys, brigade commanders, when we were younger, right after the war got started, that walk up to you, shake your hand, and look at your chest, look on your side, see if you had a CIB, jump wings, ranger tab, or EIB, and they would say, you are X number quarters of an infantryman based off of those 4 assessments, right? And that was part of it because guess what? The reason why we wore badges and tabs before they took the badges and tabs away wasn't to show off. It wasn't for the infantry guy to say, hey, look at all my lickies and chewies. It was to show authority. It was to show like, yes, this guy's an experienced paratrooper because he's got master wings. Hey, this person has been to combat because he's got a CIB, right? The changes to the badge, like the master infantry badge or the master action badge, right? Those are good. And the reason why they're good is because I can walk up and visually look at somebody and it's like, oh, he's got the gold wreath. So that guy actually did his technical competence at home station and he's tactically competent because he's done it in real time, right? That's a good thing. Like when the Army went to, hey, we're going on to pin on stuff, that was to homogenize people. That was to make the guys that had all the stuff stop wearing it because it was too big of a pain in the ass to put your CIB in, make sure it was lined up and all that other stuff, or make your jump wings or make all your badges fit on your pocket. And so we went 5 years without nobody knowing anything, like the number of times that people thought I was a logistician because I knew how to do logistics as a battalion XO. Like, oh, sir, are you a quartermaster? Like, no, I'm a grunt, but you can't tell because I have freaking cross rifles on my neck. Right. But that was by design. It was designed to strip away identity of the war fighters and make everybody the same. And you can't be homogenous in an environment that requires everybody to have the same task.
Why does that work in the Marine Corps then?
Smaller force, fewer people. So that understanding works in the Marines because they're a smaller, tighter force. Like, like I can take the entire force of the Marines and drop it on Fort Bragg. You know what I mean? And that will barely be a small part of the population there. You're talking, 25,000 versus 96,000, and that's why it works so well in the Marine Corps is because, and the other part of it is the Marine's identity comes from being a Marine, right? Their identity isn't with their MOS. That's just a job that they have. They are Marines first and foremost, right? It's drastically different in the Army. Like the number of times I've heard people say, oh, don't be an infantry guy. You're never going to have a trade when you get out of the military. Are you on drugs? You're seriously on drugs. I guarantee you there are freaking people that we have served with that were different MOSs that I would run circles around. Like, yeah, I might not have all the technical competence of, the G6 dude, but I could set up a damn radio network. I know who to pull together to make this thing work. I may not have the expertise technically to do it, but I have the expertise in leadership to bring a team together that can accomplish the same task. And it's a development thing. We used to be, when the Army used to say, hey, there's these O1 alpha positions, combat arms and material. Like, you as a grunt tanker or field artillery guy can hold this job down. That literally is telling you, hey, fool, you need to learn everybody's job so you understand how to employ them. So if I dropped a freaking second lieutenant that happens to be branched infantry into a field artillery battalion, that kid should be able to figure it out. Would we do that today? No, we still have branch detailing, but from a perspective of like having an O2 or O1 alpha billet, we don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
And the reason why we don't do that anymore is because I think it's this strong desire for specialization, but the more special you are, the less special you actually are, right? Because I can only like, do you ever, I'm really going to date myself. If you've never seen the movie Matilda, right? Did you ever see the movie Matilda about the boxing kangaroo?
Yeah.
What happened when Matilda got hit? She stopped fighting. Why? Because she hadn't been cross-trained in all the other things that she needed to do to be a good boxer. So when she got hit, she stopped fighting. Like, that's the military in and of itself, right? You have to be able to understand enough of everything else to protect yourself so you can be successful, even though you might be good at this one thing. Like, I might be the greatest commo guy in the world, but if I can't shoot, it doesn't matter if I'm in a gunfight. Like, we aren't in a commo fight, we're in a gunfight. Like, we're fighting battles here. And, it's the same thing like, oh, well, he's the subject matter expert on, policy in the Middle East. Well, that's cute. That ain't gonna help me. Like, why? Because Afghanistan is completely different from Iraq. Sub-Saharan Africa is completely different from, China or Russia or Iran or downtown freaking Fayetteville, right? So your thought of expertise, like, it's great to be an expert, but I would rather be an expert in warfighting rather than an expert in one particular thing. And I think that's something that's lost on this generation because everybody wants to have all the credentials stacked up on top of them so they can feel special, but it actually makes you less special. Like, oh, well, this dude, look at it this way. How many AFPAC hands guys survived the rifting in the late 2000s? Not many. How many FAOs survived when they started adjusting the Army and there weren't any FAOs left, right? When you look at all those people that were highly, highly specialized, I won't say they're not good. They were good at their job, but there's less opportunity for you because how many positions can you fill?
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like, better to be the Swiss Army knife and be 70% at a lot of things than be 100% in one thing.
Yeah. Rob, I'm gonna cut you loose, brother. You've been with us much longer than we planned, and it was a great conversation. You're the first guest on this project, and I'm thankful to you for joining me. And but more important than that, just thank you for your friendship, man. You are a true friend, and you are a mentor, not just to so many others, but also to me. And I really am grateful for your time today.
No, I appreciate you having me on, man. Like I said, it's the least that we can do. If you try to do something to pay it forward every day, it's going to come back to you. You never know when, you never know how, but it's going to come back to you because too many people are self-interested, and those are the people that nobody wants to hang out with, right? We know people that are like that. Like, every time they open their mouth, everybody cringes and rolls their eyes. Like, oh, right? We know people like that. And the sad part of it is because they want to be so special that they forget to be human. So that's the most important part, is just be a damn human, man. Like call somebody, check on them. Hey, man, you good? All right, cool. Good to hear you. And like, for those of you guys that don't know, John Mark and I have connected probably more after 20 years of military service than we ever did when we were in the academy and ever when we were in uniform. So like, this is all like organically happening post uniform time, which is nuts. But the reality of it is like, common experiences create opportunities for you to connect.
100%. And I love our text exchanges. We solve the world's problems one thread at a time, my man. So thank you so much, Rob.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.
All right. Yep. Cheers.